affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday weekend edition. And for those of you that like to keep track, what happened a year ago? Well, that was the debate between Joe Biden and, of course, well, I see some mouths opening right now. Donald Trump. Hard to believe that was just a year ago.
Today?
Yeah, June 27th, 2024, where the world saw that maybe the current president at the time was not up to the task. Amazing what's happened in 1 year.
What a different country we would live in if that had not happened.
I just thought I'd start off with that one as well as a few others.
Seems like ancient history, doesn't it?
It does, and it was just, again, 365 days, but there you go. The Biden's disastrous debate just 1 year ago, June 27th. But as we all around the table have said, we could fill the 2 hours just talking about Supreme Court decisions. I just mentioned yesterday, of course, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3. By the way, all these are 6-3. That'll be interesting. In terms of Medina versus Planned Parenthood, that has to do with our friends there in South Carolina simply saying, wait a minute, do we have to fund these Planned Parenthood clinics through Medicare? And we do not. And so that is, or Medicaid, I should say. We also have a Supreme Court decision on what I think is one of the most important cases. This is the one out of Maryland, Mahmoud versus Taylor. And that one has to do with whether or not you could opt out your children of some of the things that had a very blatant LGBTQ presentation. And another 6-3 decision, and I'm not full of all the other ones, and that has to do with the fact the Supreme Court ruled that at least these rogue judges cannot keep issuing injunctions in terms of him wanting to deal with the issue of birthright citizenship. And so, of course, we have Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, who, of course, is the CEO and Chief Counsel for First Liberty Institute, and last week was back from being one of the commissioners at the National Religious Liberty Commission. And Kelly, all of these are 6-3. That tells us something, doesn't it?
Yeah, those are the ones that they wait until the very end. They did have a day, what was it, a week or two ago? We talked about this, where there were 9-0, 9-0, 9-0. And in fact, one of the liberals wrote each of those opinions, which it's obviously not a mistake that they're sort of sending a message on that day. And it's true that most decisions by the Supreme Court are, more unanimous than anything else. But the ones that there are disagreement over are usually the big ones that they're waiting at the end to release. I think there were 6 today, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I only gave you a couple.
Yeah, and like for instance, you missed the one about whether a state, in this case Texas law was being challenged, can require that if you go online to try to view pornography, that you can't be a minor.
Right.
And that was upheld 6-3 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Significant. And I mean, that one kind of was a little more interesting to me. I feel like I was proven right today about a lot of things I've been saying to people who've been very angry about different things, which we'll get to in a minute. But the one that I wasn't sure about was Justice Thomas on a free speech claim and pornography has been a little mixed. If you remember, they had that time about bleeding signals into your room, and he said, he ruled the other way, and you had this weird where it looked like Thomas was joining, the liberals, which he's not usually associated with. Well, he actually wrote this opinion,
yes,
upholding the right to, and saying really there was minimal speech issues with it because there are no, minors' rights to pornography, and so if there's some sort of adult a loss there, it's only because it would be very, very indirect because really these are to stop minors from viewing, and so I didn't know where he would go there because he's kind of thrown some curveballs in the past. The others, a number of things I predicted this Mahmoud case was going to be a victory. I predicted that Alito would write it, which he did.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was going to be as strong as it was. It was very strong, which is a great victory for all the point of view listeners who care about their authority over their children, to their religious upbringing, everything. Very important case. The other thing, though, that I've been telling people is they've been complaining, all these judges, and I don't see anything happening. And I'm like, I said, the court, and I've saying this on point of view, the court will correct this.
And
they do not want the Congress coming in to correct it for them, because if people don't understand this, in the Constitution, the Supreme Court is in the Constitution. None of the other courts are in the Constitution. They were created by Congress.
Yes.
Congress can just abolish all of them if they want to. So they have authority. Well, the court does not want that. They're going to lose their independence. So I said, you watch. They will take care of this. In the opinion of today, they did take care of these.
And Amy Coney Barrett righted.
That was my next point.
I knew where you're going.
Everybody's been complaining about Amy Coney Barrett.
Yes.
And I have to keep reminding people that, hey, Amy Coney Barrett might not be doing what you want on these emergency injunctions and et cetera, et cetera. I said, but if you'll notice, when there is a ruling that is forced, she is voting with the conservatives. So I'm not saying she's the best of the six, but I'm saying that, have a balance and a real view of this. So she's the one that wrote the opinion on these nationwide injunctions being really not compliant with the law.
Let's let Penna have a chance to say something now.
This has been such a hammer and a weapon used against President Trump getting his agenda. And so, the fact that she was very clear on this, this is a quote from the opinion, Amy Coney Barrett. Traditionally, courts issued injunctions prohibiting executive officials from enforcing a challenged law or policy only against the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. And, you've seen these judges in lower courts changing things for the whole country. And this is going to end now because of this ruling. I think I'm correct about that, Kelly.
Yes.
She said the injunctions before us today reflect a more recent development, district courts asserting the power to prohibit enforcement of a law or policy against everyone. And then she says the universal injunction was conspicuously non-existent for most of our nation's history. So it's been a newly employed weapon. It's been very, very frustrating for conservatives and people that just kind of common sense American citizens hoping to see President Trump be able to do some of these good things. So this is a real victory. I think on the identification of minors for accessing porn, this was my state representative that wrote this law in Texas. Yay, Matt Shaheen. And this is common sense. It's been a long time since we've regulated porn this way, but porn has changed. The way that kids can get it now it's very simple for them to receive it, so they're going to have to go through a couple of steps to identify themselves as old enough.
Again, we're going to go to a break, but when we come back, again, so many of these decisions. But Kelly, back to one of the phrases you use so often, and that is elections do have consequences. We know who the six are. We know who the three are. And the six came from Bush, and Trump. And the others came, of course, from the Democrats. And again, Obama and certainly Biden. And so, again, elections have consequences. And again, all these decisions, almost all of these today, 6-3, although recently we had some 9-0s as well. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, as you can imagine. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about defining woke. Today, I would like to talk about defining words. Noah Rothman recently explained how we know that woke is losing. He begins by explaining that the media has been pretending that we no longer know what the word woke means. That's a new tactic of the left, but it's like their other tactic of redefining words. One example of this linguistic sleight of hand was the decision a decade ago to ditch the phrase gun control. A reporter for The Atlantic talked about how the anti-gun advocates were toying with alternatives such as gun violence prevention and firearms regulation and gun safety. That last one has become the euphemism of choice though it does evoke the idea of a firearms training course, which many of us took before we purchased our first gun. I suspect the confusion is intentional. Another example is abortion, or what today has been called reproductive rights. A study done more than a decade ago concluded that the word choice wasn't working for activists. Therefore, we hear about reproductive justice and reproductive rights, or even women's health care. Again, I'm convinced the ambiguity is intentional. Notice the change from global cooling to global warming to climate change. But that wasn't working for environmental activists. We now hear about a climate crisis or even claim that we're in the midst of a climate emergency. And the current transgender debate requires lots of redefinitions. 5 years ago, the New York Times concluded that gender originates between your ears, not between your legs. That is why reporters stopped talking about sexual reassignment surgery in favor of calling it gender-affirming care. You know, one side is losing when it must redefine words and redefine reality to advance their agenda. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation a little bit later, we will open up the phones. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio. And, of course, we were just kind of reacting to the fact that it was just 1 year ago, June 27th, 2024. But, Kelly, you were with us last week on last Friday. What's happened just in the last week? You were suggesting that, you know, it might be wise for Donald Trump to go to Congress and get some action or statement for the use of force. Over the weekend, first of all, we have the bombing, which was very successful, unless you listen to CNN, very successful in terms of taking out some of these nuclear sites. Then we have a ceasefire, and that's all happened within the last week. So sometimes we say there is real value, Penna Dexter, in the fact that we broadcast live, and as the news comes in, we give it to you right away.
Well, yes. Today, for instance, I'm just about to get in the car to come here, and all these Supreme Court cases come down. And so, you know, I do think that, you know, as we're looking at our year end here at Point of View, you know, I've been here like 29 years off and on. And I see, you know, I get just very excited at certain times when I see the breaking news that we're able to inform people, but also at that same time, let people know how important this is to you and to your life and to our freedoms. And so, you know, that's kind of all of the above for Point of View. That's why we exist.
Yeah, you know, I think of the same thing. I mean, Point of View is a unique, it's the only show like it in the country. And it's on hundreds of Christian stations across, it should be on every Christian station, really, because where do you get an analysis of the things that are going on today, but through a frame of reference, a religious freedom, a biblical viewpoint? And you're just not going to get that. And I mean, for instance, today, okay, here we are live, decisions, you know, the biggest decisions of the term handed down today. How many other stations are you going to get a Christian analysis of the Supreme Court decisions, including from somebody who argues the Supreme Court? You're not going to, there's nowhere else you're going to find that. So it's a unique, it's always been from Marlon's beginning of this. It's, when I listen to this sitting, you know, in law school, when I was in my dorm listening to this going, man, I love this, because nobody else was doing it. And so it's a great time when people think of end of the year, which is what they got through Monday for point of view is the end of the fiscal year. It's important to make sure it reaches as many people as possible.
I might just mention that for those of you that say, well, I kind of like to wait to the last moment, well, that's Friday. And we've actually geared up because you'll see all sorts of family members of mine and others that are here that are ready to answer that phone. And so, again, that number is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. And Penna, when you came in, you were asking, well, how are we doing? Because we have a match which is now $67,000, and we have not used it up yet. And so anybody that calls in right now, whether it's a one-time gift or hope some people will consider joining us at least $1 a day or more, which is $30 a month, $360 a year, that gets matched as well. And so I would encourage people to make that phone call or visit our website, pointofview.net.
Every time someone so generously offers a match to people's donations, I just have to say, don't let us leave money on the table. You have to help us meet this match. And today it's a little bit urgent. Here it is Friday. So I would encourage people to join us, and I mean, I don't know, people across the country, I think they're excited and they want to do something also, because we're in a kind of a good opportunity zone as a Christian conservative community to get things done. Maybe you can't go to Washington. Maybe you're not about to run for office. Maybe you are. I hope you do. But to get something done or to do something or make a difference, just writing a check or making a monthly pledge it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and we talked about this off air, Kerby, but I mean, a lot of times in the church, people are told, oh, politics, that's not real Christian or whatever. And it's just so foolish. It's just so anti-biblical. I mean, look at the decisions today, okay? A major decision, which we're going to talk about, protecting the rights of parents and their children in the public schools. Well, what would have happened if 8 years ago, instead of Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton would have won? He had 3 justices he put on the Supreme Court. That 6-3 decision today would probably have been the other way, and it would have been a massive loss for parental rights all over the country, right? Yesterday, Planned Parenthood would be getting all kinds of tax money that it's not going to be getting now. The opinion about all of these things that we're going to be talking about would have all shifted. And so it really does matter. I mean, God has given us an incredible gift in this country. The freedom to choose our own leaders, our own policies, choosing good over evil. And it's not noble to decide you're going to sit it out. And so it's important that we're involved in our culture, that we are good stewards of what God gave us, and that we pass it down to our children and our grandchildren. And so talking about these, understanding these things, understanding the facts of what's out there, what are the biblical views on these things, I think is crucial for any Christian who's living in the United States.
In Penn, I was just thinking, too, we have an individual sitting here who's part of the National Religious Liberty Commission. I mean, it's kind of a who's who, and he came back last week and shared a little bit of that, and just the fact that he is here. Kelly's got a lot of things he could be doing rather than 2 hours today here on Point of View, but we get to hear the inside story of what's going on behind the scenes from an individual that's argued cases before the Supreme Court, won every one of them, by the way, and also it gives us a perspective on some of the individuals sitting on that commission. Even the fact that commission exists is, again, a testimony to Donald Trump. That's never happened before, has it?
Never has, and it's a tremendous opportunity for our country. I mean, you get to make recommendations to the president. Next year, by July 4th, 250th anniversary, our responsibility on the commission is to give specific recommendations to the president on how to advance and how to protect religious freedom for the future. And let's just say we do one thing. Let's say we give him a recommendation that solves this whole issue of churches being scared to talk about elections. Mm-hmm. That alone would be like worth the commission, right? But that's just one thing. I mean, we're going to give him a bunch of recommendations. And again, my goal on that is not recommendations that will go away when the next president comes in. It's recommendations that can be long-term. And you think, well, how would you do that if you're president? Because the next president can change. Not if you say, DOJ, I want you to bring these lawsuits. And those lawsuits create precedents. The next president can't come in and decide they're not going to follow the precedents and not follow the Constitution. So there are lots of things that can be done, and those are real opportunities. And again, we're just living in a very different time right now. This is a window. You tend to think it's always going to be the way it is, right? Well, it's not. I can tell you, as a guy who's fought for religious freedom for 36 years, this is very unique what we're in right now. It is a time to take advantage. People need to be educated, which is why they listen to Point of View. And then there are things everybody can do to make a difference, really, for the next 30, 40, 50 years.
So I remember the day that the president made the appointments, and, there are a lot of great people on the commission. I mean, for instance, our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, Paula White. I mean, just all kinds of the who's who. But I think, Kelly, as I've kind of heard your reactions to your appointment, you're probably one of the most important appointments there because of your experience with fighting for religious liberty in these cases. Because it's exactly what you said. You get a commission, and then a lot of its work goes away if the administration changes to the other party. So the happy thing that happens during liberal presidents is that we still can win Supreme Court cases. And so I think operating strategically with that in mind, you will be able to make probably some of the most lasting suggestions and contributions to it. So it's very, very exciting. I think Trump knew what he was doing, or his advisors who advised him to appoint you knew what they were doing in getting you on that commission.
Well, we're going to take a break, and this would be a great time for you to make that call, 800-347-5151. And, of course, the website is pointofview.net. Let me say, too, I encourage you also to support Kelly Shackelford. Penna, you and I both support First Liberty Institute, yes, and we certainly support Point of View. And so that is a link that you have there as well. Make sure that you get their insider report. We've got that on the website as well. And, of course, got $67,000 match challenge. We come back, we'll talk about a few of these cases. Also, we've got a little bit of judicial insurrection. There's at least one judge up there in Massachusetts that's convinced that even when the Supreme Court says it, he's going to completely turn a blind eye to that. And then we will talk about a little bit about what's going on in Iran this week. And also, Penna had a very good idea about how we could cut $2 trillion of waste. And a lot of that comes from healthcare. So we'll be talking about that too. So that's what to look forward to. But this is a perfect time to call 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
It is one thing to be anchored to God's truth for yourself, but can you share a biblical perspective on controversial issues with others in your life? When you support Point of View, you are equipping listeners to do just that. Here's a testimony from John, a listener in Alaska. Point of View prepared me to provide biblical views on contemporary issues with my young adult children. And consider this testimony from Julie in Michigan. Your program enables me to have conversations with other people, both Christian and non-Christian, that I might not be able to discuss otherwise. Right now, your gift to Point of View will go twice as far, doubled by a matching challenge. But the challenge expires. It ends June 30th, just a few days. Do not wait. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Again, that's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter. And Penna, I thought we'd get back to Kelly, at least on one issue, and that's parental rights, because this issue of Mahmoud versus Taylor, first of all, I noticed, and again, none of us have read the entire decision, but most of the commentators have said they relied a lot on Wisconsin versus Yoder. So we do want to talk about that in just a minute. But Penna, I was thinking too, as we've mentioned before, First Liberty has actually filed a similar lawsuit with those California families, haven't they?
Yes, and this case, Mahmoud, is something that we discussed along the way, and when it was being argued, we discussed it because it's almost shocking to me, but not really shocking, that schools would violate parental rights in such a dramatic way as happened in this Maryland school district in Rockville, Maryland. But the parents just wanted to get their kids out of the lessons and the requirement to read these LGBTQ promoting books. And the school did that for a while, but then they started to say that it was too much of a burden on the school to do it. Well, duh, because most parents don't want their kids reading those kind of books. So the school district revoked that ability to pull your children out, and they were absolutely draconian about it, about the kids having to sit in and read these books and not get any kind of excuse for doing it. And this was based on religious really beliefs. So it was Muslim kids, it was Catholic kids, and Jewish kids and Christian kids. These parents, they banded together to do this case. So I felt like it was a really strong case, and it turns out, yes, all the conservative, just basically smart justices on the Supreme Court, they supported it, they upheld it, and so it's great. It's a good victory, and I hope that it has strong repercussions emanating out from it.
130-page opinion. That's why you said we hadn't read it. We don't have time to read it
Golly.
before coming
Maybe
on.
over the weekend, because this one is important.
It's so good. It's Alito is the right person to write this, and he did a great job. Look, it's kind of basic. What they did is they forced kindergartners through fifth grade to read these LGBTQ books and promoting a very different view of life than and morality than the children involved and their parents believed. So those parents came forward and said, look, if you're going to do this with these young children, number one, you need to notify us, and we ought to have a right to opt our children out, because this is a violation of our parental rights. You're forcing us by compulsory attendance, into public schools, and then you're trying to force our kids to something that violates everything they believe. And so I don't think they would have done it if it was Christians. But since it was Christians and Muslims and Jewish, I think they realized they needed to do it, so they provided the exemptions until it was too many people.
Yeah, that's.
And they said, and their excuse was, "This is too many. We can't really effectuate this. It's just too much trouble." You know, that might be a clue that maybe you got something that's really not so good.
I love that.
The light bulb never goes off. And so what Alito said is, look, we've got, this goes way back. And I mean, they not only cited the Yoder case,
which is a key one.
1970s case,
right?
But also the Pierce versus Society of Sisters, back to the 1920s and 30s. And it really, what those cases say is, our children are not children of the state; they're children of the parents, and the parents are the one with the authority. In fact, it's a fundamental right to direct the upbringing, the religious upbringing, and the education of their own children. Now, in those early cases, it was, you can't force them to pick a public school; they have a right to pick a private school. And but what happens when they're in the public school? Because what would happen a lot is the schools would say, well, when your kids are here, we're the parents. We're standing in as parents. And so we can, you don't really have any rights there. And of course, they don't have a right to change the curriculum for other people, but they do have a right for their own kids. And so, Penna and you both mentioned our case in California with these families who they were number one, in their teaching materials, they told the teachers, the training materials, not to tell the parents what they were doing.
There you go.
And then they forced the fifth graders to read this book to their kindergarten buddies, asking their kindergarten buddies to question their gender. And many of these young people in fifth grade were like, I don't feel good about this at all. This seems wrong. And they went home to their parents, and the parents came to school, and they just like the Mahmoud case. They said, we want to be notified, and we need to opt our children out. And the school there, without even, ever considering doing anything, said, you'll get no notice and there's no opt-outs. And in California, with a liberal, we did not have some conservative or Republican federal judge. We had a Democrat judge. The Democrat judge says this is unconstitutional. It violates the authority of the parents. And look, I'll be honest with you. I thought we would win on the issue of the right to opt out, right? But I didn't. There really hasn't been precedent on notifying, and that's a burden on the schools, obviously, right? And so I was surprised when we won that, and I thought maybe we would lose that when we got to the Ninth Circuit, who's much more liberal. But this case today says, hey, when you start adding all this stuff together, compulsory attendance, these books that are going right after issues like what you believe marriage is and all this, you have to notify the parents of this.
It's amazing.
And you have to provide an exemption. So that is a huge, huge win for parents across the country.
So just to give a couple of examples of these books, because these are young kids. This is what's amazing, that really common sense would say you don't talk about sex to children, even all the way up to fifth grade. That's not really the time to do it. But these are assuming, I think the kids are very much more sophisticated than they normally are. But one of the books is called My Rainbow, which tells the story of a mother who creates a rainbow-colored wig for a child that is transgender. So you're supposed to explain what transgender is to a first grader. Born Ready is another book. The true story of a boy named Penelope, which recounts the tale of a biological girl who identifies as a boy and struggles to convince the world that she is male.
There's a problem with the last sentence.
Yeah, she is male. Okay, yeah. Prince and Knight is another one. Love, Violet, they tell same-sex romance stories. Kindergarten through fifth grade, you aren't even giving them a romance book, much less a transgender same-sex romance book. So this is the kind of thing that parents were trying to object to, and I think this is an important case. And it seems like, Kelly, this ruling impacts then your case, your California case, big time.
It's almost a copy. So it's going to be a great precedent. The other thing I think that I noticed in this case, and I've got to look at it deeper, but they do cite Yoder
quite a bit,
heavily.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the 70s when Yoder was cited, we had a court that wasn't that great on religious liberty, if you'll remember. That's when we had the Madeleine Murray O'Hair decisions, the no Bible, no prayer at school, all this kind of stuff. And so if you read Wisconsin v. Yoder, it's saying that really it's a parental rights case. And they say that it's kind of a, they mention religion, but it's more, they almost kind of put that in the background and talk about it just being authority of parents.
Right.
Now, that's nice for people who aren't religious still to have parental rights, and I'm all in favor of that. But this case...
looks like it gives you more strength, doesn't it?
Yeah.
More precedent?
It says the issue, and this is right in... the policy infringed upon parents' right to the free exercise of their religion. So this is really a heavy free exercise case. And free exercise, which really should be one of the most powerful rights in the First Amendment, has really been watered down in the past, and it's sort of starting to be remembered again. Mm-hmm. And it is really the whole idea of the right of conscience, the right of people to believe. So it's really, really important. I mean, one of the very things top of my list at First Liberty is to bring this back. Just like getting rid of the Lemon test and stuff on the Establishment Clause side, the free exercise and really giving it protection, because the founders are really all about the free exercise of religion. Mm-hmm. This is a really important, in addition to the parental rights and everything else, it is a core free exercise of religion right, which really does, I think, elevate and bring back what the founders were intending in the Constitution.
By the way, we will try to cover more of that next week. Of course, I might just mention we have Gary Bauer on Monday because, after all, we have some things going on in Iran and Israel and a few other places, which we'll get into as well. But let's take a break. This would be a perfect time for you to call 800-347-5151. Do you value what you're hearing right now? Would you like it to continue? We'd love to hear from you. We'll be right back.
It's been 10 years, almost to the day, since the United States Supreme Court handed down the Obergefell versus Hodges decision. The ruling instituted same-sex marriage across the land because it struck down all state laws specifying that marriage is the union between one man and one woman. The opinion, written by Justice Anthony Kennedy, emphasized the good of marriage to a society, describing it as a keystone of our social order and essential to our most profound hopes and aspirations. In an article in First Things, senior editor Matthew Schmitz says, advocates expected that allowing same-sex marriage would strengthen marriage and reaffirm its social centrality. But a decade later, the hoped-for revival of marriage has not materialized. Matthew Schmitz points out that Americans are less likely to be married today than they were 10 years ago, continuing a pre-existing trend. He says far from bringing about a revival of marriage, Obergefell has been followed by its steady decline. The Obergefell decision did not cause this decline, but it didn't help. Mr. Schmitz cites census data revealing that in 2015, 49.3% of adult Americans were married. By 2023, the percentage of adult Americans who were married had dropped to 46.4%, with 1.2 million married gay couples included in that figure. He reminds us, Obergefell was decided in a society that was increasingly choosing single life and cohabitation over committed relationships. The decision changed the very definition of marriage and took us further from God's design for the family. 10 years post-Obergefell, fewer families are forming. In his dissent in Obergefell, Chief Justice John Roberts spoke of the sheer arrogance of the ruling, saying the court invalidates the marriage laws of more than half the states and orders the transformation of a social institution that has formed the basis of human society for millennia. He asks, we must ask, just who do we think we are? For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that we are talking about judges and we're talking about the Supreme Court, a number of other things, but I do promise next hour we will get into the fact that we do have some things going on in Iran and Israel, and we've got a very good piece by James Lynch, which helps you understand a little bit more of the Ayatollah Khamenei and what he is saying and what is happening in Iran. Also a good piece by Victor Davis Hanson, and then we'll get into, of course, the protests, the riots, and a variety of other things. But I thought just before we go, I guess I'm part of the Amy Coney Barrett Anti-Defamation League because some people have been saying some pretty harsh things about her. But here's a quote or two from her that reminds me more of Clarence Thomas or Neil Gorsuch. When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to. I love that line. The court today puts an end to the increasingly common practice of federal courts issuing universal injunctions. Kelly, how is it that one federal judge in one part of the country can shut down the entire country, and included the President of the United States?
Well, that's what the court said today. They can't. Okay, they can't. I mean, and I would say, I mean, there's a lot in the opinion, but the main thing is the Judiciary Act, which creates these lower courts, which is, in other words, Congress created these lower courts. In that law, they do not give the district court judges the right to issue a universal injunction. They give them the right to do an equitable act, like an injunction towards the party before them. And this goes way back, and they look at the history, and that was to stop something. I mean, they're usually lawsuits are to rectify some sort of crisis, and there are unique situations where if the court doesn't act immediately, what the whole thing that you're arguing about could be over. And that's what injunctions are for. But they're for the parties, not for people who aren't before the court. These universal injunctions enjoin for the whole country. All these other people aren't in court. All these other entities aren't in court. And that's just totally against what judges are supposed to do. We have a deal for a class action. It's a very strict law and all that. But that's not what this is. The judges is going, I know you're here, Kerby, but I think I'll do an injunction for everybody else too. And the court's like going, no. And then they add to that, Justice Barrett adds to that, and this one is an interference with a branch of government that has authority in this area. So that's like irreparable harm towards them, not towards the plaintiff in the case. So it was a really strong decision. Again, I felt like this was going to happen because the Chief Justice was watching this abuse that was occurring and knew that Congress was about, and in fact, our friend Mike Johnson said, we could just abolish all these lower courts if we wanted to. Just kind of sending a message. And I knew the chief got the message, and the court is now taking care of this abuse to some extent. We'll see what happens after this.
One of the cases that's been talked about in conjunction with this is the birthright citizenship rulings, and President Trump saying that birthright citizenship isn't valid and all of that. And so I don't know. I just wondered if Kelly has any thoughts on how that might affect that.
Yeah, if you look at the opinion, that's what this opinion was. It was right. They didn't get to the substance, which was what is birthright citizenship and what does it mean. The liberals all wanted to talk about that. They didn't want to talk about the procedure. None of the six said a word. And so, again, I think if you read the opinions from the past and what the justices have said, I think that you're not going to have very many votes for the Trump position on doing sort of a redefinition of what birthright citizenship means. And the only person I know, the only judge who actually has a way that could possibly work is Judge Ho, who has said that what's happened with the border over the last Biden administration was an invasion. Yeah. And then you have
a different term.
Yeah. And so some of the law professors like Professor Blackman and others have written that if it was an invasion, then none of those people are citizens who were born after that. So it's like if an army came into your country and then somebody had children, they're not citizens.
We know that. Yeah.
That's the only
concept. Yeah.
But that's a newer argument and not the argument of how to define the provision itself. So I think the court wasn't ready to get there. The liberals wanted to talk about it anyway because they weren't going to win on the procedure. But the big issue they were trying to do in this case was nationwide. These universal injunctions are over from these district court judges.
Have to be. Yeah. And again, let me just mention that we're going to be going to a break in just a minute. And I would hope that if you are learning something today, and I can't imagine anybody hasn't learned a great deal today, Penna, that's one of the reasons why we encourage people to give us a call at 800-347-5151 or to visit the website. But I thought I would put on one of the articles here, Judicial Insurrection Breaks New Ground. It's one thing for a judge to issue a universal controversial injunction. But Penna, we're talking about a judge here, Brian Murphy, who was kind of ushered in at the last moment. He really came into the judiciary just less than a month before Donald Trump took office. But seems like no matter what the Supreme Court says, he's going to do it his way. And I think this is why some people are starting to use the word impeachment. Not an impeachment of Trump, but an impeachment of this judge.
Yes, and he deserves it. And, that's what they're becoming. I mean, you could really define them as trying to be the president, take the president's role in leading on whatever policy it is. And, I mean, it's really usurping power. And so, I'm so glad for this ruling today that was announced.
That does help, doesn't it? Yeah.
It helps.
Yeah.
I think it'll send a message to him. He was planning to play cute. He wouldn't say he was defying the order. He would say he's adding an additional argument, and therefore he's keeping an injunction in place. But you're beyond threading the line there. And I think after this message from the Supreme Court, and written by no other than the strong arm of Amy Coney Barrett, right? That's kind of a message to the judges. You need to stop this.
I think so.
And so we'll see. I mean, if somebody doesn't, I think you're going to start seeing sanctions from the court, which they can do, and then eventually, as Penna and you both talked about, I think impeachment. Now, the Chief Justice says he thinks it's improper to impeach a judge based upon an opinion or their rulings. It's only for like some sort of crime. Yeah. I disagree with that. Right. I think that's wrong.
I think the framers intended impeachment to be used more than it is.
It says for good behavior.
Yes.
And for good behavior,
they knew what that meant.
You remain on the court as long as you are in good behavior. Now, that obviously means if you commit a crime that,
of course,
you'd be thrown off. But I think it also means if you refuse to hold to your position and you violate your position, I think that's a basis for impeachment as well. Of course, it would never happen. You might get impeached, but you're not going to get the vote in the Senate, the 2/3 vote to convict, unless a bunch of the Democrats decide to do it, and I wouldn't see that happen.
You might have a Speaker of the House decide not to fund that particular individual in the federal court system. But we're coming to a break. Penna, what would you say to our listeners that are thinking about whether or not to support Point of View?
I would say just do what you can. Dig deep into your heart and your checkbook. And just think about the year ahead and how much opportunity we have to inform people, to help people remain active, engaged, and to kind of tie up some of the loose ends that people don't quite understand, especially now in this day where we're a very divided country. And even on the conservative side, some people are divided on certain issues. And just to give people all the information they need and also tie it to biblical truth and to God's position on some of these things.
1-800-347-5151. 1-800-347-5151. Let's see if we can get every one of the phones ringing, and this would be a great time to call. You won't miss any of the content. We'll be back right after this.
It is one thing to be anchored to God's truth for yourself, but can you share a biblical perspective on controversial issues with others in your life? When you support Point of View, you are equipping listeners to do just that. Here's a testimony from John, a listener in Alaska. Point of View prepared me to provide biblical views on contemporary issues with my young adult children. And consider this testimony from Julie in Michigan. Your program enables me to have conversations with other people, both Christian and non-Christian, that I might not be able to discuss otherwise. Right now, your gift to Point of View will go twice as far, doubled by a matching challenge. But the challenge expires. It ends June 30th, just a few days. Do not wait. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Again, that's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio. And again, my, what a week makes, because here Victor Davis Hanson said, you know, this mystique about this indomitable terror state of Iran seems to be in ruins. You have the Supreme Leader Khamenei, who is saying that we are going to destroy the little Satan and the big Satan, and this is certainly going to be a victory for us. Now, he's still saying that. He says the Islamic Republic was victorious and in retaliation delivered a hand slap to America's face. United States will pay a heavy price. Well, the only one seems to be paying a heavy price, Penna Dexter, is $1 trillion worth of missiles, centrifuges, and 5 decades of work now went up in smoke. What has happened to Israel, to Iran, and the Middle East? Some things have changed dramatically, haven't they?
Yes, and they were just about there. I mean, the infrastructure was, things were moving along in Iran, and this was probably the last opportunity that we would have had to once and for all wipe out their nuclear capability and possibilities and set them back. And so, I love hearing President Trump talk about how he's wanted to do this for a long time. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, and a lot of other people have said that, including people like Hillary Clinton. And so, it's just common worldwide knowledge that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. And, it was just interesting last week. I know that you discussed this on Point of View, and everybody was a little bit on knife's edge, wondering what was going to happen, because Trump said 60 days, and I will make a decision. Well, he'd already made the decision in like 3 days. This unbelievable attack that really did, all reports now are that it effectively wiped out the enrichment program, and destroyed what was there, even in the Fordo. And, of course, you have to go in there and really see, but so many different experts are saying that now, except, there's another person or organization that lost in this whole deal, and that's CNN, because they just insisted on reporting and going back and attacking the president on, what he did and the decision that he made. But I think worldwide it's enhanced his reputation. And I think also it's changed the calculation in the Middle East. I think you're going to see a lot of players moving around now, and it's going to be very interesting. It was a bold move on the part of this president. These are weapons that have never been used, never been employed, but they had been developed. The United States, through its ingenuity, had done so, and they were used and they were effective.
Yeah, it's. I tell you, the first thing I think of when I watch, I watch the Iranian leadership and say the most ridiculous things. They remind me of one of those shows you watch where somebody gets shrinked and they're into this little ant size, and they talk about how they're going to destroy the big guy who could just step on him with half of his little toe, and they're just screaming and yelling about how they're going to And the first thought I have with that is, oh, I'm so thankful these crazy people don't have a nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really have, they're nuts. They're zealots and nuts. It's a bad combination. And so if they had a nuclear weapon, I mean, they would use it at the first opportunity. It's like somebody said, and I thought this was a great point too. When Russia and America had nuclear weapons, there was a mutual deterrence.
Right.
Okay. If Iran has one, there's no mutual deterrence. Mm-mm. They think that they'll actually, be rewarded if they shoot a bunch of ballistic missiles to take out Israel or take out the United States. Even if they're destroyed, it's like a great victory. Mm-hmm. And so if they had a nuclear weapon, this would change everything. And what's amazing to me is, again, whatever people think of Trump, right? He's certainly, some of his ways sometimes are not the ways we would use. But whatever you think of him, all these other presidents, have been playing around with this. And you got to give Trump credit, too. 60 days, let's negotiate. At day 61, when they refused to negotiate, Israel attacked. He let go and said Israel can do what they want because I tried. And then even after that, he said, I'm going to give you another 2 weeks to talk to me. And the day 1 or day 2, in the United Nations, that the Iran representative said there will be no negotiation. There'll be no talking with Trump. So the next day, boom. He gave them every opportunity. And they didn't take it. And then the operation, you've got to give credit to the military because, we don't have a lot of opportunity. We've seen a lot of really bad stuff, right? Under Biden. You saw the Afghanistan. We've seen some things that make it look like our military is not so good. Well, they finally got to do what they do. And what they did was really, really incredible. Just executed perfectly. The deception involved was also really thought through. Just really was, kudos to all those involved in the operation, from the president on down through those in the military who handled it. Really amazing what happened, and appears to be greatly successful. And I do think, as Penna said, this is going to change things in a very positive way in the Middle East. Of course, one of the crazy people running around ready to blow up the world is kind of taken out of the picture now, and reasonable people can sit down and try to work together.
I think, even if everything weren't destroyed, even if there's a possibility and they try to re-up their nuclear program again, the President Trump just demonstrated that he will actually do what he says he's going to do. And he will take this kind of an action. He will do it. It's very surgical. He didn't kill anybody. He basically just destroyed the equipment. And so, I learned about deterrence when I took military strategy in college. Uh-huh. And we had things like mutual assured destruction, détente, a nuclear umbrella. But if you don't have the credibility that you're actually going to act, mm-hmm. none of those things work. And so this president just went in and showed everybody that he will act. And I think that in itself, it actually is a recipe for stability.
It's a great point, because if you look at what Trump did the first time, if mm-hmm. you'll remember, there were a couple of major military actions he took. One was on the cyanide gas, and it was a biological weapon that mm-hmm. was used. He went after that, and there was one other, and he did it at the beginning, and it just sort of sent a message to everybody else. This guy's kind of crazy, and he might do something.
Takes out Qasem Soleimani, and
yeah. And so it made things really smooth for the rest of it, and that's kind of what he's doing here. Although he kind of gave him a chance to avoid it.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, again, if you would be interested in joining with us, and I hope that you would, because you probably have learned quite a bit today, as we've not only talked about some of these judicial issues, but also what's going on in foreign policy. We do have people standing by, waiting to get your phone call, 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Of course, you can always go to the website, pointofview.net. We have a match on the table. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about defining woke.
Today I would like to talk about defining words. Noah Rothman recently explained how we know that woke is losing. He begins by explaining that the media has been pretending that we no longer know what the word woke means. That's a new tactic of the left, but it's like their other tactic of redefining words. One example of this linguistic sleight of hand was the decision a decade ago to ditch the phrase gun control. A reporter for The Atlantic talked about how the anti-gun advocates were toying with alternatives such as gun violence prevention and firearms regulation and gun safety. That last one has become the euphemism of choice, though it does evoke the idea of a firearms training course, which many of us took before we purchased our first gun. I suspect the confusion is intentional. Another example is abortion, or what today has been called reproductive rights. A study done more than a decade ago concluded that the word choice wasn't working for activists. Therefore, we hear about reproductive justice and reproductive rights, or even women's health care. Again, I'm convinced the ambiguity is intentional. Notice the change from global cooling to global warming to climate change. But that wasn't working for environmental activists. We now hear about a climate crisis or even claim that we're in the midst of a climate emergency. And the current transgender debate requires lots of redefinitions. 5 years ago, the New York Times concluded that gender originates between your ears, not between your legs. That is why reporters stopped talking about sexual reassignment surgery in favor of calling it gender-affirming care. You know one side is losing when it must redefine words and redefine reality to advance their agenda. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we have Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio. We're going to also be talking in just a minute with the president of Point of View. But Penna, you were talking about the loser, CNN. Of course, the other loser would be the Supreme Commander. I want to get some of the quotes from you in just a minute. But I was thinking some of the winners, there have been a few phrases that I don't hear anymore. Remember, one of those was taco. You know, Trump always chickens out. Anybody hearing about that one anymore? Don't think so. One of the other ones was, of course, we got to know Pete Hegseth when he came to the luncheon for Point of View a while back, and we were hearing for a while that the whole Pentagon is in disarray under Pete Hegseth. After what I just heard Kelly Shackelford say just a minute ago, seems like the military's clicking along pretty well, hitting on all cylinders, don't you think?
I think that the media on that front, on the Hegseth front, had a field day just trying to throw these reports out about him.
Yes.
Because he was working, he had to have been working behind the scenes to get ready for this very thing that happened over the weekend. I mean, that Pentagon was, you know, it was job one, and he was leading, and look what happened.
And he took them on.
Yes, he did.
Yes.
He did.
Yeah, I thought it was excellent, and I thought, just the irresponsibility of some of the reporting. I mean, people are getting tired of it, but usually there's not pushback in the very specific way that you're seeing from the president on this as well. I mean, number one, somebody's leaking information about military.
Yeah.
That's bad to start. But then the president pushed back, and then Hegseth pushed back, not only on that, but also on this question of how many women pilots there were.
That was the one that made everybody laugh.
And I just thought that the whole point of this, that Pete Hegseth made was essentially, why are you just trying to find, wanting to find that our country is failing, or, it's okay to ask questions and get the information, but then to keep pushing when you got wrong information, because it's like your goal is for America to go down. I mean, it's like they're from, Russia or somewhere else. And it's just odd. There are people that so hate Donald Trump and hate other people who are in power that they would rather see their country go down than it to succeed under their leadership. And that's pretty sad.
Absolutely. It's sad. And it's, I don't think this is a phenomenon that we had back at 9/11, let's say. At least usually when there's something like this where it's obvious Iran's a bad actor, it's obvious they're a huge threat to the United States and really Europe and the world, Israel, that, you would take out their weapons that could kill millions of people, and everybody's, pretty much supports that, except for those few. Little
later on, we'll talk about the possible new mayor in New York City. Of course, it's only right. But even in New York City, you've, of course, seen people flying Hamas flags. But the other day, we saw people flying Iranian flags. We cannot make some of this up, but that's just kind of where we are in this country.
It is. And I it's hard. One of the things that happened as soon as Trump came into presidency was these executive orders.
Yes.
And I mean, every day, it was just like boom, boom. I mean, it was very fast. It was shock and awe to the other side. They couldn't even recover for the first thing that came, and then another one came. And then as they started to try to, another one and another one. And I think we've, gotten too used to that, right? Because if you think of what's just happened, like you say, just in the last week, I mean, this is like a whole presidential term of significance, especially for Christians and people who, have focused on our relationship with Israel. I mean, look at the whole Middle East has just been reset in a major way. Okay, a decision that came down today is the most significant for the rights of Christian parents over their children than we have seen in our lifetime. Came down today. And there's more, I mean, those are just a couple, right? So, I mean, it's incredible the things that are happening that are positive for those who are in favor of sort of a biblical viewpoint of these issues and of Israel and of everything else. This is huge, 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 and it's 1 week, and we'll be on to something else next week, and that is not
And we
normal.
haven't even mentioned NATO and what President Trump has gotten from European countries in terms of their contributions.
Sure. And again, you can read the one by Victor Davis Hanson, what about Hezbollah? Well, their commanders are either dead, maimed, or hiding. Hamas has fled into subterranean labyrinth. The last Assad thug went to Russia. What about the Houthis? They're still trying to reconsider whether or not they launched their last missile. I mean, we are so changing the Middle East. We are so changing some of the decisions coming down from the Supreme Court, so changing a lot of things that it's just, again, a time when we're really encouraged. And so I, again, just thought it would be good to at least hear for a few minutes from the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly, because we are in the midst of our fiscal year end, and it ends on Monday. But Friday's kind of the last day before we get back on Monday, and I'd like to know how we're doing.
We have had over 100 people that have given toward the fiscal year end, and we want to say thank you to every one of you. We appreciate your giving. I don't think that you can even begin to imagine how important your gifts are and how much they mean to us. So thank you to each and every one of you who have given. But we do have a very significant ways to go. We've had about $20,000 that's come in for the match, but that means that we've still got about $47,000 left, and it's Friday, and the end of the year is on Monday, so we do need to hear from you. And let me say, if you have been questioning whether or not your gift to Point of View will make a difference, I cannot emphatically answer that question yes loud enough. I could literally sit here all day and tell you stories about how people's lives have been impacted by Point of View in just remarkable ways, and how those people have gone on to do some amazing things to impact our country and the kingdom of God. And your gift really will make a tremendous difference But the program can't continue without you. So if you're kind of waiting to see if maybe you do need the gift or not, we do need your help. So please take a moment and make that phone call or go online and please send a generous gift.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I guess I've been around long enough to know that Point of View does a lot with the gifts of listeners and donors as far as making things happen. We try to put out a quality product, and not only do we have our radio show, but we have a website, and we back everything up we say with either articles, research, documentation. And so there's really nowhere where you can get, I think, the information and then add to that the tie into biblical truth and the motivation. You know, we're Christians, we're believers first and foremost. And then we come from a very conservative viewpoint that really is the only thing that works to have a strong and powerful nation.
I would say this as somebody who leads another nonprofit, First Liberty. People often don't understand. This is the end of the fiscal year for First Liberty and for Point of View, and just think of it being instead like it's the very end of December. And what's going to happen is these different ministries, like Point of View, like First Liberty, whatever comes in is going to decide what kind of operation, what kind of budget, because everybody has to then create a budget, and then that's for the next year. Well, you don't really know what you can do completely until you know how you just ended that year. And so I would just encourage you those ministries that you really think are doing things that are having impact. And I would always say that it's not just about, we've got great intentions. What are the results, right? What is really happening? I mean, go where you see God doing things. And so I just encourage you, look at those things and go ahead and give to those now, because it really affects. I mean, we are looking at what we're going to do next year at First Liberty. Point of View is looking at what they can do, how many stations they can be on, how many people they can reach. And so I would just highly encourage you to do that. You can go to pointofview.net and do that. And First Liberty's link is there too. But this is a very key time for the ability of what the ministries are going to be able to do, because they're going to have to, after what happens between now and Monday, then they'll set, here's what we can do for next year.
And again, we've talked about that before, and I've even quoted Kelly saying that in some respects, the fiscal year end is as important, if not more important, than December 31st, because that helps us figure out what our budget would be in the next coming year. So let's, if we can, encourage you during the break. Let's see if we can get all the phones ringing again. 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. Of course, as Kelly mentioned, pointofview.net. Let's take a break and we'll see what has happened, and we'll be back right after this.
It is one thing to be anchored to God's truth for yourself, but can you share a biblical perspective on controversial issues with others in your life? When you support Point of View, you are equipping listeners to do just that. Here's a testimony from John, a listener in Alaska. Point of View prepared me to provide biblical views on contemporary issues with my young adult children. And consider this testimony from Julie in Michigan. Your program enables me to have conversations with other people, both Christian and non-Christian, that I might not be able to discuss otherwise. Right now, your gift to Point of View will go twice as far, doubled by a matching challenge. But the challenge expires. It ends June 30th, just a few days. Do not wait. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Again, that's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, let me just mention that we probably won't get to all of our articles here today. I think each one of them are worth some time. I may postpone some of them till Friday, but I just couldn't go any longer without at least getting some comments around the table from Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. And Penn, I'll come to you first because we have this individual who was in the New York Assembly almost every year. I go to New York and I fly into Albany, so I'm familiar with what that is like there. But New York has become sort of like my hometown of Berkeley, the, if you will, the socialist capital for the East Coast now, not like the one in the West Coast. And this is an individual, a 33-year-old Ugandan-born Muslim socialist Marxist, Zohran Mamdani, and he has won the Democratic primary. That doesn't mean he's the mayor yet, but he's won the Democratic primary, and oftentimes Democrats do win the election. I mean, last time we had a Republican in the mayor's office was Rudy Giuliani. That goes back a few years and really dates me as well. But he is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. He believes that the city should take over the grocery stores. If you think you don't like the grocery store, just imagine what DMV grocery stores are going to look like. Wants to defund the police, wants to free the criminals. Oh, my goodness. Give us some background on this man.
You've given some good background there, but I will say the biggest issue in New York City is the rising cost of living. And when you think of it, if you know kids that get out of college and they go get their big job in New York, and then they look for an apartment, and they either can't find one, they've got to have 3 roommates in one tiny apartment, or, something like that, and get subsidized by their parents to even pay the rent. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how bad it is in New York. And so that's been the issue. And these are the things that he wants to do. He wants a tax increase on people making over $1 million a year, which is about, it's going to be a big amount of money, a big tax increase, and it's going to hurt the working man because these are business owners. He wants to freeze rent on rent-subsidized apartments, which
rent control.
43% of the apartments are rent subsidized right now. So he wants to freeze the rents on that. So if you're an investor and you're going to buy apartments to rent to people, are you going to do that? Are you going to buy any more? No. He wants to increase publicly subsidized housing to the tune of $70 billion. So great, New York can afford that. He wants to provide free bus service. He wants to open, as you said, a government-operated grocery store. He wants public child care for young children. And instead of beefing up the police for their homeless and crime problem, he wants a community safety commission.
Send in the social workers.
So, the people that voted for him are white, and the college-educated, a lot of young people voted for him. And all of these policies are only going to make the cost of living worse in New York and the availability of housing worse. But people don't understand that. They just, I don't know why they voted for him. He's going to have as an opponent Eric Adams, who's the current mayor, who's the Democrats don't like him anymore. So he's running as an independent. Mm-hmm. He has a possibility of winning, especially if people start to make common sense between now and November.
Yeah, there's so many things here. Number one, I think it'll be interesting to see if businesses, people in New York, that even if they're liberal, they don't want to see New York destroyed. They might get behind Eric Adams and save really New York from what's about to happen. The free market, has consequences. You can elect a guy like this, and there will be a response. I mean, people will leave.
Yes, they will.
And that'll put massive extra pressure on New York. They'll have less tax money, less everything. I mean, people that are making $1 million a year, do you think they have to be in New York? New York City we're talking about. Yeah. I mean, how hard is it to move to New Jersey? Connecticut. They're all right there, right? So that, but to me, this is like a little experiment microcosm of what we're seeing happen, like to the Democratic Party.
Right.
Back
to your point.
They get they get this really leftist, progressive, Marxist kind of group, and eventually, the moderate Democrats, there just aren't any because they keep pushing them out. And then that group takes the people who aren't the most extreme in it and they push those people out. And they're just getting so small. And so New York has already done this through COVID and all the lack of freedom and all the restrictions. And now they have the type of people that are ready to put a guy who's an avowed, I mean, this is not somebody else's description. He is a socialist Marxist. And so guess what's going to happen? It's going to get more extreme. People are going to leave who have common sense, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And so absent somebody bailing them out, which is what's unfortunately happened in the past, you'd have a president come in of that party and bail people out. I mean, they are going to be, if the businesses and all that who will probably have their property confiscated at some point under this guy, there's going to be all kinds of legal stuff that's going to happen because there's all kind of constitutional rights that Marxists, they don't like that stuff. It gets in their way. So this is, the only chance is for the independents, Adams, et cetera, to kind of rally together. Democrats who don't want to see their city destroyed to kind of come together. Otherwise, this is going to be just what we've been watching happen, where the Democratic Party has pushed out the young people, they've pushed out minorities, they've just gotten so extreme with this that regular Americans do not feel welcome there, and they don't want to have any part of it. And now New York is going way even further than that.
Penna, what about the face of the Democratic Party? Because you got some older people retiring, but if the face of the Democratic Party is Jasmine Crockett and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Zohran Mamdani, which are all the younger faces in the Democratic Party, I think it's back to what Kelly's saying. It's getting smaller and more radical, and so as a result, it's almost like a doom loop. What about that?
It is like a doom loop. You have to remember, one of the stats that shocked me last night when I heard this election was very low turnout. 5 to 7% of New Yorkers voted for him, for Zohran Mamdani. So, this is like, he's just risen and gotten this kind of attention. And boy, it's kind of shocking and a little bit scary. And yes, you get the radical end of the party, and it tends to be the younger people. His major opponent was Andrew Cuomo, who was the governor of New York, and he's slightly more moderate, and so a lot of the minorities actually voted for Cuomo. A lot of business people voted for Cuomo, but this guy somehow got the votes. And it's not good for the party. It's not good for the Democrat Party. It's great for those who are conservative and Republican. And there's not a choice like that though in New York. Well, there is. Curtis Sliwa is running on the Republican ticket, so he maybe has a better chance.
Yeah, we've had him on years ago, but it's been a long time.
Yeah.
What about? I got to put Charlie Kirk on the table here for a minute because Charlie Kirk, has said that college is a scam, and he the other day posted and he said if you look at the polling and you look at those individuals, and I think it was 19 to 54 who are white and college graduates, they voted for Zohran Mamdani. And if you look at those same demographics for those that did not go to college, they voted for Andrew Cuomo. And he said, you've made my case. I mean, there seems to be almost no common sense when you get with some of these college graduates that probably went to NYU or went to Columbia or went to Cornell or so, something like that, right?
I think so. I think college teaches you to be a leftist. Most colleges, actually, almost all the colleges.
Yeah, there's very few. I know Charlie has his own list, and there's like a very small list of ones that are acceptable. Even the Christian schools, many of them have just totally abandoned, Christian worldview in what they do without saying so.
Yeah, well, again, buyer beware or parents beware. Think about where you're sending your kids, and that sort of makes his case. We won't get to all of these issues, but when we come back, of course, Penna Dexter has written a very good piece because just as we talked the other day about 3 years after Dobbs and the overturning of Roe versus Wade, 10 years after same-sex marriage, and that's Penna Dexter's commentary. We'll talk about that. And we'll still take your phone calls, 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
It's been 10 years, almost to the day, since the United States Supreme Court handed down the Obergefell versus Hodges decision. The ruling instituted same-sex marriage across the land because it struck down all state laws specifying that marriage is the union between one man and one woman. The opinion, written by Justice Anthony Kennedy, emphasized the good of marriage to a society, describing it as a keystone of our social order and essential to our most profound hopes and aspirations. In an article in First Things, senior editor Matthew Schmitz says, advocates expected that allowing same-sex marriage would strengthen marriage and reaffirm its social centrality. But a decade later, the hoped-for revival of marriage has not materialized. Matthew Schmitz points out that Americans are less likely to be married today than they were 10 years ago, continuing a pre-existing trend. He says far from bringing about a revival of marriage, Obergefell has been followed by its steady decline. The Obergefell decision did not cause this decline, but it didn't help. Mr. Schmitz cites census data revealing that in 2015, 49.3% of adult Americans were married. By 2023, the percentage of adult Americans who were married had dropped to 46.4%, with 1.2 million married gay couples included in that figure. He reminds us, Obergefell was decided in a society that was increasingly choosing single life and cohabitation over committed relationships. The decision changed the very definition of marriage and took us further from God's design for the family. 10 years post-Obergefell, fewer families are forming. In his dissent in Obergefell, Chief Justice John Roberts spoke of the sheer arrogance of the ruling, saying the court invalidates the marriage laws of more than half the states and orders the transformation of a social institution that has formed the basis of human society for millennia. He asks, we must ask, just who do we think we are? For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that one of the benefits of listening to Point of View is, of course, we give you a chance to hear some of the commentary. Mine airs a quarter after the hour, Penna's quarter to the hour. And, of course, right now you can go to the website and see Penna Dexter's commentary. If you click on the button that says Read Now, you also see there's a button that says Never Miss a Viewpoint. And that viewpoint commentary comes into your inbox from me Monday through Friday. Penna's will come in tomorrow on Saturday. But this illustrates, Penna, I think exactly what Kelly was talking about. We're talking about now the 10-year anniversary of a decision and a ruling that instituted same-sex marriage. I doubt any other conservative talk show will talk about this. I'm not sure that many Christian stations will talk about this. And yet, as you point out, this opinion written by Justice Anthony Kennedy changed the definition of marriage. And as we can see, you point out that the decision didn't cause the decline in marriage, but it certainly didn't help. And my argument has been, if you have dollars and all of a sudden you have counterfeit dollars being sent around in the particular economy, people after a while don't trust the real dollar because you have the counterfeit. We've had a counterfeit that has been instituted over the last 10 years, and it's not surprising that a lot of young people just don't want to get married.
It's not. And you know what I thought would happen with the Obergefell? And of course, I watched the same-sex marriage agenda go through our institutions, our states, for about 20 years until it did actually happen. We were talking about it on Point of View for that long. We didn't believe that people would want same-sex marriage at first, but we came to believe it. And, you know, what I also thought would happen was that marriage would just mean less. And I think it has lost its meaning, not even just because of Obergefell, but other reasons that marriage has lost meaning over the years. I mean, cohabitation, for instance. So, but that's not exactly what happened. What happened was that you had same-sex marriage, but you didn't get that many more marriages. In fact, you got fewer marriages. Some of them were same-sex marriages, but marriage didn't get more popular or more widespread. Marriage has dropped. The marriage rates have dropped. The birth rates have dropped. Everything's dropped. So family formation has dropped. And so God's design for populating the earth, for bringing His kingdom into our world and His laws and His views and making us flourish, all of that design has to do with marriage and family and having babies. Well, none of that has followed this decision. So this decision has not helped at all. And I think the other part of this is there's just been sort of a moral degradation that's taken place in the country. And so having same-sex marriage and not upholding biblical marriage has hurt us. And, you know, we could still get it back and we could still repeal the Obergefell decision. We have a very different court. I don't know if we have the will to do that.
The other question I had for Kelly is, you can get yourself in trouble. Let's say you're a flight attendant for Alaska Airlines and you have questions about this whole issue of LGBTQ, and you can lose your job, right?
Yeah, you know, the first thought when I hear about Obergefell, I did the Sunday morning show on Fox. I think it was Chris Wallace who was used to do it, but it was Shannon Bream was sitting in as the moderator, and she had myself and the head of Lambda Legal, which is behind that, and we ended the program in that sort of discussion/debate. I ended just with a quote from Justice Alito in the Obergefell case, where they said, "Oh, you know, look, we're going to force this new definition of marriage, but it won't hurt religious freedom. People can still believe what they want and express what they want." And Justice Alito's response in the opinion was, "Yes, you'll still have your freedom to express your beliefs, as long as you do it in the corner of your home with a whisper."
Yes,
and
it's a great line.
And it was exactly right. There right? How many? What have we seen in the last years? I mean, all these Christians who believe that marriage is a man and a woman lose their jobs, get canceled in just all kinds of ways, and we got huge numbers of examples of these. And so it was used as a weapon, even though it wasn't really even a need to do this. And really, when I'm talking about it like it's a public policy decision, because that's there's nothing in the Constitution on this.
No.
It's marriage itself is not even the Constitution. It's up to the states. This was totally made up by the justices at the time. And just like they made up abortion, which is nowhere in the Constitution. And so when Penna says, if they were being consistent, they would go back and they would say, you know what, it's not in the Constitution. But the culture has there's been so much embedding in the culture in this that The question is whether there'll be a cultural change. But from a legal standpoint, we really should have the justices enforcing the rights that are actually there, written, and not making up things that aren't there, because that's not their job. That's being a legislature. And this court is much more likely to move in that direction, but we'll have to see.
Let me just say that, again, I want to get some other comments around the table, but if you say, I really appreciate the fact that you raised this issue, it's not something I'm going to hear anywhere else. Back to Kelly's point, I think that is really the case. And if you'd like to read Penna's commentary, of course, you can go to the website. But right next to it, of course, is the banner that says Anchored to Truth. We still, of course, have the match on the table. There's a place where you can click on that button that says Give Now. And I just hope that even as we go off the air in a couple of minutes, that you might, since I know so many of you like to hear what's going on, we'll maybe postpone it and call right after we get off the air, because we'll still answer the phone calls, 800-347-5151. But Ben, I wanted to give you some final comments, because you wrote this because I think we need to remind ourselves of this decision and remind ourselves that we're still living in this post-ruling of same-sex marriage, and it's still affecting our children and our grandchildren.
It is affecting them. And, it was interesting. After Obergefell was decided, and then, there was a lot made of it among the gay community. People were getting, quote unquote, married. And it started, the public opinion on same-sex marriage started to rise, and you had more acceptance of it. And now, after 10 years, those numbers are dropping.
Yes, they are.
People are seeing, I think people are upset at what's happening to our country, because we aren't flourishing in families the way we used to. And people are starting to kind of look back at that. They're coming back to church. They're looking at some of these more conservative things that they want to be involved in. And I'm hoping that they come back and start getting married and having babies again. But, this was a dark, dark day. I think it was a dark day, because I saw, the redefinition of something that God has for us that's so good. And I do hope that, it cycles out. I think it'll take people, though, to be involved. And that's why we're not going to be silent.
And I might just mention, we do have a booklet on same-sex marriage, because you might say, how do I talk to my kids and my grandkids about that? And we'll be glad to send that to you free of charge. And most importantly, that's one of the reasons why to support Point of View, because we send those booklets out to those of you that join for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year or more. I would encourage you to consider clicking on that banner there that allows you to give monthly. Our gifts come in monthly. Our expenses come in monthly. It matches up pretty well. But even if a one-time gift, and we do have that $67,000 match challenge. So, Kelly, I'm looking forward to next week. It seems like every week we've got something else we're talking about.
We do. And I would ask, for prayer, we have a couple of cases at the Supreme Court, but there's one they literally could be deciding right now whether they take the Olivier case, which will be a great case on the right to share the gospel in public parks, which is under attack, believe it or not, and this will be an opportunity. They're looking at it very seriously, and we could hear as early as Monday, so please keep that in prayer.
You'll see some links to First Liberty, and I would encourage you to pray about that as well. Also pray about your response, even though we're going off the air, 800-347-5151. I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. See you on Monday with Gary Bauer. See you then.
It is one thing to be anchored to God's truth for yourself, but can you share a biblical perspective on controversial issues with others in your life? When you support Point of View, you are equipping listeners to do just that. Here's a testimony from John, a listener in Alaska. Point of View prepared me to provide biblical views on contemporary issues with my young adult children. And consider this testimony from Julie in Michigan. Your program enables me to have conversations with other people, both Christian and non-Christian, that I might not be able to discuss otherwise. Right now, your gift to Point of View will go twice as far, doubled by a matching challenge. But the challenge expires. It ends June 30th, just a few days. Do not wait. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Again, that's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.